In August of 2019, the arena stopped scrolling for a moment to snicker at a headline that seemed too absurd to be actual. The president of the USA, Donald Trump, had reportedly asked his advisors approximately the opportunity of buying Greenland. The internet exploded with jokes. Late nighttime comedians made image montages of gold towers towering over fishing villages in Nuuk. The Prime Minister of Denmark, known as the concept absurd. It became dealt with as a second of Silety project, long past wrong. The global laughed, and then the arena moved on. But in the quiet quarters of the Pentagon, and within the state of affairs rooms of the State Department, nobody was giggling. The generals and the geologists knew something that the general public did, now not. They knew that the offer to buy Greenland was no longer a shaggy dog story. It was a desperate geopolitical maneuver. It became a frantic try and stable the survival of the American military-industrial complicated. They knew that the ice sheet of Greenland became hiding the single maximum valuable asset on planet Earth. To apprehend why the USA could risk diplomatic humiliation to buy an island of ice and rock, we should look below the surface. We have to look beyond the glaciers and the fjords and examine the chemistry of the present-day world. The 21st century isn't constructed on metal and coal. It is constructed on a particular organization of 17 chemical elements called the uncommon earth elements. These are the nutrients of present-day enterprise. You cannot construct an iPhone without them. You cannot build an electric-powered automobile battery without them. You cannot build a wind turbine without them. And most significantly, you cannot build an F-35 fighter jet or a Tomahawk missile or a nuclear submarine without them. For the remaining 30 years, America has slept whilst a rival electricity cornered the marketplace on these factors. That rival is China. Today, China controls more or less 90% of the processing of uncommon earth factors. They have a chokehold on the destiny of Era. If Beijing decided tomorrow to turn off the tap, the American army would grind to a halt and the Silicon Valley would cross darkish. This is the nightmare scenario that maintains Navy strategists awake at nighttime. But there's a solution. There's a way out of the entice. And it lies buried beneath the ice of southern Greenland in an area referred to as Kvanefjeld. This far-off mountain sits on top of what's believed to be the biggest deposit of rare earth factors within the world. It is the Saudi Arabia of the Destiny. The U.S. that controls Greenland controls the thermostat of the worldwide Era market. This is why America desires to shop for Greenland. It is not approximately land. It is not about ego. It is about breaking a monopoly that threatens the existence of the West. The story of Greenland is regularly advised as a tale of isolation. It is the largest island inside the International. Yet it has a population smaller than a soccer stadium. 56,000 people live on a landmass 3 times the scale of Texas. For centuries, it became visible as a frozen desert beneficial simplest for fishing and looking seals. But geography is destiny, and Greenland sits on the most strategic intersection on the map. During the Cold War, Greenland turned into the shield of North America. It sits at once at the shortest direction between Moscow and Washington, D.C. If the Soviet Union had ever released a nuclear strike, the missiles could have flown over Greenland. That is why the USA built Thue Air Base within the A a long way north of the island. It is a big setup with radar structures, designed to locate incoming threats. The US has continually understood the Navy cost of the island. In truth, 1946 turned into now not the primary time the United States attempted to shop for it. President Harry Truman provided Denmark $100 million in gold bars for the island in 1946. He understood that whoever holds Greenland holds the keys to the North Atlantic, but the fee of Greenland has shifted. In the 20th century, its cost turned into its area. In the 21st century, its value is its geology. And the catalyst for this transformation is a phenomenon that generally brings terrible news: weather change. As the planet warms, the Arctic is heating up 2 times as rapid as the relaxation of the sector. The big ice sheet that has blanketed Greenland for thousands and thousands of years is retreating. It is melting at a charge of billions of heaps per war. This is a tragedy for the surroundings. However, for the mining enterprise, it's miles a treasure map being discovered in actual time. As the ice pulls returned, it exposes historic rock formations that have not visible the sun for eons. These rocks are part of the Ilamos complex, a geological freak of nature that incorporates concentrations of rare minerals found nowhere else on Earth. Let us appearance closer at what's really within the rock at Kvanefjeld. The 2 maximum crucial factors discovered there are neodymium and dapprosium. These names sound abstract, but they impact your everyday life each time you pick up your phone or start your car. Neodymium is the key to creating brilliant magnets. Before neodymium magnets were heavy and vulnerable, with neodymium, you could create a magnet the size of a coin. This is robust sufficient to boost a bowling ball. Why does this depend? Because of vehicles. Every electric motor works on magnetism. If you have effective lightweight magnets, you can build effective lightweight automobiles. This is the name of the game sauce of the electric vehicle revolution. You can't have a Tesla or excessive overall performance electric car without neodymium magnets. They are also important for the miniaturization of electronics. The vibration motor on your telephone, the speaker gadget in your PC, the difficult drive in your computer all depend on these magnets. Then there may be dysprosium. Neodymium magnets have a flaw. They lose their magnetism at high temperatures. If an engine gets too hot, the magnet dies. Dysprosium is the magic factor that fixes this. You upload a little dysprosium, and the magnet turns into heat resistant. This is important for Army packages. A missile guidance machine or a jet engine turbine operates at intense warmth. Without dysprosium, the weapon fails. Currently, America is predicated on China for nearly all of its processed dysprosium. Imagine the vulnerability. The U.S. Navy is constructing ships that depend upon components that could handiest be sourced from its greatest strategic rival. It is a stage of dependency that makes the oil crisis of the 1970s look like a minor inconvenience. The Chinese government is properly aware about this leverage. In 1992, the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping famously stated, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." He knew precisely what he changed into constructing. For many years, China stored the price of these minerals artificially low. They subsidized their mines and omitted environmental regulations. This drove mines inside the US and Australia out of business. The Mountain Pass mine in California, which once furnished the arena with uncommon earths, shut down as it couldn't compete with Chinese costs. Once the opposition was dead, China consolidated its grip. They built the processing plants, the refineries, and the supply chains. They created a vertical monopoly, and then they showed the sector what happens whilst you cross a monopoly. In 2010, a Chinese fishing trawler collided with Japanese coast shield vessels near the disputed Skaku Islands. Japan arrested the Chinese captain. Beijing became furious, but they did now not ship warships. They simply stopped exporting rare earths to Japan. The Japanese business machine panicked. Toyota, Nissan, and Honda could not construct automobiles. Electronics giants could not build components. The Japanese economic system was delivered to its knees without a single shot being fired. Japan released the captain. The lesson became discovered. The rare earth deliver chain is a weapon. This incident awakened the Pentagon. They realized that they had allowed an essential vulnerability to broaden. They commenced seeking out alternatives. They checked out Australia. They checked out Vietnam. They looked at Brazil, but none of them had the dimensions and the concentration of Kvanefjeld. The Kvanefjeld site in southern Greenland is precise. It is not just that it has uncommon earths. It is that it has them in large portions, and they're especially handy. Estimates endorse that Kvanefjeld on my own ought to meet the global call for uncommon earths for decades. It ought to spoil the Chinese monopoly overnight. But getting the minerals out of the floor isn't always only a count number of digging. It is an issue of politics, and that is where the tale gets complex. Greenland is a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Nuuk, the capital, handles domestic affairs, but Copenhagen handles overseas policy and protection. However, the ownership of mineral resources belongs to the Greenlandic humans. For years, a fierce debate has raged in Greenland about whether to mine Kvanefjeld. The problem is uranium. The uncommon earth minerals at Kvanefjeld are combined collectively with uranium and thorium. To get the rare earths, you need to dig up the uranium. For a rustic with a pristine surroundings and a subculture based totally on fishing and searching, the concept of an open pit uranium mine is terrifying. This internal battle in Greenland became a proxy battle for global powers. On one side, you had the environmentalists and the local Inuit groups who feared radioactive dust and the pollutants in their fjords. On the alternative aspect, you had the pro-independence faction. Many Greenlanders dream of full independence from Denmark. Currently, Denmark subsidizes the Greenlandic financial system with a block furnish of loads of thousands and thousands of bucks at 12 months. Without that money, Greenland would move bankrupt. The pro-mining faction argues that the most effective manner to reap economic independence and emerge as a sovereign state is to sell the minerals into this delicate local debate, step the Chinese. A Chinese employer known as Shenhe Resources bought a stake within the Australian business enterprise that held the license to mine Kvanefjeld. This prompted alarm bells in Washington. It seemed like China became approximately to do to Greenland what it had completed to Africa: buy the infrastructure bribing the elite and lock up the resources. If a Chinese-motivated business enterprise controlled Kvanefjeld, the Chinese monopoly could remain intact. They would sincerely own the alternative deliver as nicely. This turned into the context of Donald Trump's provide. It became a clumsy signal that America could no longer permit Greenland fall into Beijing's orbit. The State Department opened a consulate in Nuuk for the primary time in many years. They began supplying useful resource packages. They sent high delegations to court docket the Greenlandic government. It turned into a traction offensive designed to counter Chinese have an effect on. But the Russians are also looking. As the ice melts, new delivery lanes are establishing up in the Arctic. The northern sea direction along the coast of Russia cuts the journey time between Europe and Asia by way of 40% in comparison to the Suez Canal. Greenland sits on the gateway to these new lanes. Russia has been militarizing its Arctic coast, building new bases and refurbishing old Soviet ones. They see the Arctic as their destiny economic engine. So you have three superpowers circling this island of 56,000 people. You have the environmental tragedy of the melting ice, revealing the economic prize of the century. And you've got a local population stuck in the middle, looking to determine, in the event that they should promote their birthright for independence, or protect their land, and remain dependent on Denmark. The geology of Kvanefjeld is complex. The rock is referred to as lugit. It is a beautiful darkish stone with sparkling crystals embedded in it, but extracting the factors requires chemical leaching. It produces huge amounts of tailings or waste rock. In an area like Greenland, where the wind howls at 100 miles an hour and the ecosystems are fragile, containing that waste is a nightmare engineering mission. But America Army appears on the F-35 program and does not see the waste rock. They see the guidance systems. An F-35 carries nearly 0 kilos of rare earth substances. The focused on lasers, the radar arrays, the communique gadget, and the stealth coating all require these elements. The electric-powered actuators that circulate the flaps on the wings use neodymium magnets. Without these elements, the F-35 is simply a completely steeply priced paperweight. The dependency extends to the gap race. Satellites require samarium cobalt magnets to feature in the bloodless vacuum of space. The Mars rovers run on nuclear batteries fueled through plutonium, but their cars and sensors run on uncommon Earths. If the West wants to keep its aspect in area, it wishes Greenland. The narrative of the laughable buy offer concealed the deadly seriousness of the state of affairs. The United States can't find the money for to lose the Arctic. It cannot have the funds for to allow China consolidate the assets of the future. The 21st century could be described with the aid of the transition to inexperienced strength. Wind turbines require big quantities of dysprosium and neodymium for his or her turbines. An unmarried massive wind turbine can include loads of kilos of uncommon earths. As the world transitions away from fossil fuels, the call for those elements is expected to explode via 500 or 600%. China knows this. Their strategy is referred to as Made in China 2025. Their goal is to dominate the high-tech industries of the destiny. They do no longer just need to promote the raw minerals. They need to sell the finished batteries, the completed electric-powered cars, the completed robots. They want to move up the value chain. To do that, they need to control the uncooked substances. Kvanefjeld is the best rock massive enough to face in their way. It is the simplest deposit that could balance the scales. That is why the diplomats are flying to Nuuk. That is why the geological surveys are being funded by Western governments. That is why Greenland is the most crucial piece of real estate in the world. As we end the first part of this deep dive, we see the board is ready. The ice is melting. The treasure is found out. The superpowers are shifting their pieces. But the game is not pretty much geology. It is about human beings. It is about the 56,000 Greenlanders who have to vote on the future of their island. In the second one element, we can cross onto the ground in Greenland. We will study the particular companies preventing for the rights. We will study the political earthquake that befell inside the 2021 elections. And we will see how American Navy is quietly making ready for a chilly struggle inside the coldest location on Earth. The wind in Nars isn't just like the wind everywhere else. It screams down from the ice sheet carrying the bite of lots of years of frozen records. Nars is a small town of approximately 1,500 humans in southern Greenland. It sits at the foot of the Kvanefjeld mountain. For most of records, it changed into a quiet farming and fishing community recognized for its colorful wood houses and its sheep farms. But these days, Nars is the epicenter of a worldwide geopolitical earthquake. The people of this small metropolis are protecting the future of the American Army and the global green power revolution of their hands. To apprehend the intensity of this war, we ought to look at the company struggle that has been waging silently for rights to the mountain. The agency that held the license to mine Kvanefjeld for years became Greenland Minerals. On paper, it turned into an Australian organization. But if you observe the money, you found yourself in Chengdu, China. The biggest shareholder in Greenland Minerals turned into Shangyi Resources, a Chinese giant with close ties to the kingdom. This terrified the strategists in Washington. It meant that although the mine opened, the rare earths might nonetheless drift back to China for processing, keeping the monopoly. The plan for the mine changed into big. It would be an open pit mine, sitting on top of the mountain overlooking the town. It would contain crushing millions of lots of radioactive rock. The dust from the mine might blow directly over Narsak. The farmers feared their sheep might be poisoned. The fishermen feared the runoff might kill the shrimp and the whales in the fjord. The metropolis became divided. Families stopped speaking to each other. One facet noticed jobs and independence. The other aspect noticed loss of life and destruction. This neighborhood dispute exploded into a national disaster in 2021. The government of Greenland called a snap election. The entire election turned into fought on an unmarried problem. The mine. The pro-mining celebration, Shaemut argued that the mine changed into the golden ticket. They argued that the Chinese funding might bring infrastructure, airports, and cash. They performed at the dream of a Greenlandic republic unfastened from Danish manipulate. But the opposition party, Inuit Ataqatigiit, or IIA, ran on a platform of zero tolerance for uranium mining. They argued that the health of the ancestors within the land became well worth greater than money. They tapped right into a deep indigenous connection to the surroundings. The world watched this election intently. In Washington and Beijing, diplomats held their breath. The end result became a surprise. The anti-mining party won in a landslide. One of their first acts was to prohibit uranium mining, efficiently killing the Kvanefjeld assignment in its modern shape. Washington breathed a sigh of comfort. The immediate chance of a Chinese-managed uranium mine became long gone. But the trouble remained. The uncommon earths were nevertheless in the ground, and the West nonetheless needed them. This brings us to the plan B. If Kavana is politically poisonous, wherein else can the USA appearance? The solution lies simply down the fjord at an area known as Tan Breeze. Tan Breeze is another massive deposit of rare earths in Greenland, but the geology is exclusive. It does no longer comprise uranium. This makes it politically perfect. The proprietor of Tonray is an Australian geologist who has spent years lobbying the USA government for support. He calls the webpage a snoozing large. He claims it has sufficient dysprosium to deliver the sector for 1,000 years. The US government has quietly pivoted its aid to initiatives like Tonray. They are trying to create a supply chain that bypasses China absolutely. The plan is to mine the rocks in Greenland, ship them to processing vegetation inside the United States or Canada, and turn them into magnets and factories in the West. It is a method of overall decoupling. However, building a supply chain from scratch is noticeably hard. Processing rare earths is a grimy, complicated enterprise. You have to separate 17 unique factors that are chemically almost same. It requires large amounts of acid and warmth. It produces poisonous waste. For 30 years, the West becomes satisfied to allow China do the dirty paintings. We exported the pollution and imported the cheap magnets. Now we have to discover ways to do the dirty work ourselves, and we should do it in a manner that meets strict environmental requirements. The fee is astronomical. A rare earth processing plant can value $1,000 million to construct. Private buyers are wary. They recognize that if they spend the money, China can honestly flood the marketplace, drop the rate, and bankrupt them just like they did within the 90s. This is why the United States Army is getting concerned. The Pentagon is investing direct cash into mining agencies. They are signing contracts to assure they'll buy the minerals regardless of the price. They are treating the mining enterprise just like the defense industry. It is no longer a free marketplace. It is a matter of countrywide protection. While the lawyers and geologists combat over the rocks, the military is getting ready for the physical reality of a contested Arctic. The Thule Air Base, now known as Pufik Space Base, is being upgraded. It is no longer just about watching for Soviet bombers. It is ready area dominance and missile defense. Russia has developed hypersonic missiles, guns that fly at 5 instances the velocity of sound and might maneuver in flight. These guns threaten to make traditional radar obsolete. The Arctic is the maximum probable trajectory for a hypersonic strike against America. Greenland is the most effective place wherein sensors can be positioned to tune those threats in time. The US is making an investment billions to upgrade the eyes and ears of the North, but they're additionally worried about the floor. And the US Navy has reactivated its 2D fleet that is accountable for the North Atlantic. They are sending submarines under the Arctic ice to shadow Russian actions. They are education marines to fight in sub-zero conditions. The Arctic is turning into a theater of war again. And then there is the Polar Silk Road. China has declared itself a close to Arctic country. This is a made-up term with no foundation in global regulation, but it signals their purpose. China wants to use the Arctic delivery lanes to transport goods to Europe. They are constructing icebreakers. They are the only USA, aside from Russia, building nuclear-powered icebreakers. They want to integrate Greenland into their Belt and Street Initiative. They offered to construct 3 worldwide airports in Greenland. The charge tag changed into small for China, but huge for Greenland. It would have given Beijing manipulate over the island's transportation infrastructure. The Danish government, below heavy strain from Washington, stepped in and financed the airports themselves to maintain the Chinese out. This turned into a direct intervention to forestall the debt lure diplomacy that China has used in Sri Lanka and Africa. The story of purchasing Greenland turned into by no means about a real property transaction, wherein a test is signed and a deed is acceded over. It was a metaphor for adverse takeover of a sphere of influence. The US can't technically buy the island, but it's miles buying the loyalty of the island. It is pouring cash into training, tourism, and civil society in Nuuk. It is attempting to show to the Greenlanders that their destiny lies with the West, no longer the East. But the Greenlanders are savvy. They recognize they may be sitting on a gold mine. They are playing the superpowers toward every different. They welcome the U.S. interest, but they refuse to be a puppet. They are using the leverage of their resources to call for more autonomy from Denmark. They are constructing their personal foreign policy. The destiny of Greenland is the future of the 21st century economy. If the ice keeps to soften, more deposits may be discovered. The gold rush is just beginning. Companies from Canada, Britain, and Australia are scouring the coastlines. They are searching out zinc. They are seeking out gold. They're looking for rubies. But the uncommon earths remain the prize. Imagine a global 10 years from now. You drive an electric-powered automobile. The motor in that automobile was built with neodymium, mined within the fjords of Greenland, processed in a refinery in Texas, and assembled in Detroit. That is the vision America authorities is combating for. The opportunity as a international where you pressure a Chinese car or walk. The warfare for Greenland is also a warfare against time. The permafrost is thawing. The infrastructure in the Arctic is sinking. The very floor they want to mine is turning into unstable. Extracting resources in a changing weather creates a vicious cycle. The extra we mine to construct green technology, the extra we disturb the delicate Arctic ecosystem. It is a paradox. We want to wreck part of nature to keep the rest of the planet from weather trade. Kvanefjeld stands as a monument to this quandary. It is a black mountain of dying and salvation. It contains the poison of uranium and the remedy of green power. The desire of whether or not to open it has paralyzed a kingdom and mobilized empires. The media laughed while the purchase offer was made, due to the fact they saw Greenland as a relic of the past, an empty space at the map. But the strategists saw it because the center of the map. They understood that the map is converting, the ice is vanishing, and the geography of power is transferring north. The subsequent time you take a look at your phone, think about the gray, windy slopes of Nars. Think of the sheep farmers looking the helicopters of the prospector's land. Think of the diplomats whispering within the hallways of Nuke. The tool to your hand connects you to that frozen frontier. The electrons flowing through its circuits are ruled by the magnets that come from the Earth. And the manipulate of that Earth is the defining war of our time. The United States did now not purchase Greenland with a check, but its miles shopping for it with coverage, with strain, and with presence. The flag flying over Nuke is still the pink and white of Greenland, but the shadow cast over it's far the eagle and the dragon. The Cold War is lower back, and this time it is being fought for the warmth of the future. The uncommon Earth warfare isn't always coming. It is already right here. The front line is the ice. This is John, and this is the Cinematic History Tales channel. Subscribe now to stay in advance of the curve, because when the history books are written, you may need to be among the few who saw it.